thanks for listening to High Education. I'm Amelia Day, lifetime educator and proud cat mom recording from my studio apartment. Schools are doing their best all over the nation to open safely and responsibly for their students. Some schools are opening entirely in person while others are opening using distance learning. Distance learning is the use of technology such as Google Classroom, Seesaw, Schoology, Dojo, Zoom, and many more platforms to teach students remotely. Another model is the hybrid model, where schools combine these two methods in a unique way. Today, we're going to be focusing on distance learning and ways to encourage best practices for all involved. Some things are out of your control, so please do not be offended if I advise something that isn't possible for you.
How can teachers make their workload easier?
For most teachers, the dream is to have excellent work and personal life boundaries to ensure that we are limiting the number of hours that we're working outside of our contract hours. Most teachers really enjoy the planning process and the teaching process. So it's not that we don't like to do it, it's just that we also are people who need to do other things. So I'm trying to come up with some ideas this episode on how to make your workload easier. And I just have a list of ideas that I'm going to run through. So, the first idea is to use the three before me method for tech issues. If you're an elementary school teacher who uses small groups at all, you probably have heard of this method. It's where if a student needs help, rather than going straight to the teacher for that help, they can ask three people. Usually it's their peers or different instructional assistants. But in this case, since they're at home, if they run across a tech issue or some confusion with an assignment, they can turn to Google, a sibling, or a parent, and then FaceTime a friend before going to the teacher for help. Because right now, if you're distance learning, you're probably doing an IT job as well as your teaching job. And I understand that it can be frustrating trying to take on that additional responsibility. So just offloading that responsibility, teaching those expectations of how to ask help before asking them to do it. So making sure they understand the difference between asking for help and asking for the answers would just be something you would have to teach them before you could expect them to be able to do it efficiently by themselves. The next advice I have for you ties back into our last episode on empathy. I challenge you to unlock your empathy, to realize that your students are struggling with their work life balance just as you are, and to give them some flexibility with your expectations. I'm not saying to lower your expectations. I'm saying that if you want to keep your positive mindset about your students and about your job, you need to look at your expectations from their point of view and decide whether or not it's something that makes sense for your students, whether or not they're low socioeconomic status students or in a wealthy home. So just knowing that if they are having tech issues, you can extend that deadline. Or if they are having focus issues or some home life issues, extending deadlines is an excellent way to show that you care, to ensure that you are not burning out of frustration, and to ensure that your students are capable of success in this learning environment. The next point of advice is that good teaching strategies are relevant today, just like they were before COVID. So, simplifying your instructions are going to help you to make sure that your students really understand what you're asking of them, and to make sure that your students can follow through successfully on those instructions without asking you a million questions. So, breaking up your instructions into small chunks will really help you because then you don't have to repeat those instructions over and over again. And then also being cognizant of your needs. I know that during in person instruction, you're used to walking around the classroom, observing your students, seeing who's struggling, who's doing well, and giving additional assistance to those who are struggling. It's harder to do that right now with virtual lessons. So you could use things like taking a survey prior to teaching the lesson to find out what your students' background knowledge might be, and see the students who don't have as much background knowledge on whatever the lesson is, and scheduling a small group or a one-on-one Zoom call in addition to the whole group that all of your students are getting. It's going to help you to make sure that you are reaching those students who need additional supports on whatever lesson you're providing. So creating that survey, sending it out, and then getting the majority of those turned in before the lesson even starts is going to actually, while it sounds like more work in the beginning, it will save you frustration because then your students won't come back with terrible grades. Also, on that same note, look into peer tutoring options for extra credits for your students who are excelling on whatever program you are using, because it will help you. It'll provide some relief from having to be the only tutor for 20 students plus, while it will cement their understanding, the ones who are providing the tutoring. It will give your students a chance to take on that role of tutoring. Maybe it's a student who's not usually excelling, but they are just hyper amazing at one lesson, well, they can take on the tutor position for that lesson, whereas maybe they are the ones getting the extra tutoring usually. So it'll help their esteem as well. So that's my general advice for how to simplify your workload to make it more efficient, as well as making sure that you are keeping equity in mind. And then I want to point out that if you check out my website, I will have links posted for resources that may help. I will continue to add to this list as I find more resources. So later on in this season, I would suggest coming back to that page maybe every time you tune into a new episode, because there might be more resources later on that could be beneficial to you later.
How can teachers attract more engagement from their students?
Engaging our students in our lessons is tricky at the best of times. So, adding on the fact that we're not there right in front of them to make sure that they are staying focused, as well as the fact that it's kind of tricky to just stay hyper focused to a screen for as long as we are expecting our students. And engagement is going to become that much more tricky. We know from different theorists that motivation is one of the top things that predict whether a student is going to be successful, and it's something that we have the least control of as educators. So I can understand that at this point it's kind of scary thinking about how am I going to engage my students. I want to encourage you to let you know that there is a tons of studies on this coming out all the time, and the key is to make sure that your students can see the relevance of what they are learning to their lives currently, not what they need to know in 10 years or what they need to know for high school or the next step. They don't Usually students are not thinking that far ahead, especially if they are in a high stress situation. They're thinking, what can help my life right now? So, tying your lessons to something that they care about currently is going to be an excellent way to motivate and engage your students. And so that's what I'm going to be focusing on is how to tie your instruction to what students care about currently. My first step is to make sure that it's a high touch learning involvement in the curriculum. So involving more collaborative activities and interactions with teachers and classmates is definitely going to be helpful. All students are probably struggling with some social isolation right now. So, as much projects that you can provide that require students to work together is going to be very beneficial for them academically, socially, motivationally, all of those things. Then, just making sure that greater interactivity is required of them for their assignments. Let's limit the number of worksheets or virtual worksheets we're asking our students to do, and instead pop in with some games or web based simulations, some interactive videos. I know that if you go to TED.ed, they are an excellent resource of virtual lessons that have already been created, or you can make your own using that program. And they are videos, they use quizzes, they use discussion boards. So, this is something that can be very easy to do as long as you know where to look. And I will definitely include some resources on my website, like I mentioned. If you go to highedpod.com, I'll have a list of just different resources for different grade levels or subjects on there. Next, I want to talk about making sure that you are personalizing the learning expectations for your students. So, have a range of activities that address student skills or interests or home situations. You could provide students a menu or a choice board for displaying their learning. And this is something that you should be doing in person as well as often as you can. It's a form of differentiation, so, by providing students with different versions of the same activity that they can complete, you are going to be providing students with agency. They can choose which activity to complete, knowing themselves the best, knowing, okay, I'm really great at algebra, so I'm going to find the more difficult, more challenging activity for that subject, but I'm not as great in English. So I'm going to look for the lower level activity or the activity that seems a little easier to me. By providing them with choice, you are motivating them. You are also providing them with as best of a chance of success as you can. They're still going to be meeting the same standards, but they will have different levels of challenge, which will be good for all learners, whether or not they're English language learners, GT, or TAG, or whatever your district calls it. So, for my next point, I want you to focus on balancing your instruction. So, making sure that you have some direct instruction, some cognitive models of learning, which are going to be your structured activities that don't just put info in students' head, but also get knowledge out, such as open ended questioning, experiments, problem solving activities, those type of things. And then you'll also need some social models of learning, such as jigsaw approaches, reciprocal teaching, discussions, debates, peer tutoring. Making sure that you have a balance of these three forms of instruction, so that way you're not just sitting there lecturing them all day. Guarantee you're going to lose quite a few of your students the longer they have to just sit and listen. So making sure that you provide that direct instruction, it is necessary, but give it in little bite-sized chunks, and will have fewer times of direct instruction when comparing it to activities and social models of learning. Okay, so for the next one, students need to see the relevance of what they're learning. So, like I mentioned before, that's heavily tied to motivational theories. And so making sure that students don't feel like whatever you're putting in front of them is busy work. I mean, obviously, you're going to have to give them a worksheet here and there, maybe as an assessment or as a practice one, but making sure that whatever worksheet you do put in front of them is highly essential and will be beneficial to them is going to be really important. I want to mention that project based learning might be a lifesaver for you right now. You can tie multiple subject standards into one project. And I don't know if you've heard of project based learning, but basically, for each unit, you have one big project that the student is going to have to complete, their overarching goal. And then you will be teaching them different strategies to complete that project. And inside that unit, you could have English standards, math standards, science standards, social emotional standards, all of these different great things that they need will be taught. But the student will be motivated to learn that because they need it in order to actually complete their project. Usually the projects are something that they can see is relevant to their lives. I've seen projects for with high schoolers where they're trying to solve the water crisis in Flint. I've seen middle schoolers working on virtual museums for civil rights. I've seen first graders trying to make a blueprint to sell a house to different committees. These are all great projects that will be highly engaging. But I can understand if you're like, whoa, man, I'm trying to learn all this technology. I can't learn a new method of teaching as well at the same time. I totally get that. And it can be time consuming to create these projects. So if you go to PBL Works, their website, they have multiple free projects that other teachers have already created and mastered and perfected. And all you have to do is just copy their lessons. And you can tweak it to make it fit your class, but then it's not quite as much work. I know that they have like 13 free projects for like K through second, and then other projects for older kids. I also will be including on my website a project that I created for my graduate program, and it's about creating newspapers. It's a second grade and fifth grade joint project. So if you're a second grade or a fifth grade teacher, or a teacher who thinks that you can modify that project to fit your grade, this might be something that would be helpful to tie multiple standards together, but also to kind of tie the school community back together as well. Because I know that we're all missing the sense of community that a school provides. And so if you can create a newspaper that you can send to every home in the district at like maybe once a month or once every 2 weeks, that has your students writing, your students artwork, whatever, this would be something that would really motivate the students as well as engage the community. So I will post that on uh, highedpod.com as well for you guys to look at.
How can teachers make things easier for parents or guardians trying to help their students, or students who are trying to do it alone?
So obviously, families everywhere are feeling the pressure right now as schools are reopening. Not only are they trying to balance their work and then taking care of the kids, but now on top of it, they are trying to meet the needs of their students' education as well. And so they are going to be feeling frustrated, and it's our time as educators to kind of try to think from their perspective on how to make it easier, especially if the student is trying to do it alone without their guardian's help. So, a lot of students are going to be faced with being completely independent for the first time. in their education, and it's kind of difficult for them. Being cognizant of that and really empathizing strongly with them is going to help them. Besides that, try to limit the number of communication tools that you are asking your students and families to learn. So don't have multiple accounts. Don't have like a class dojo and then a seesaw, then a class room using Google that they have to learn. Choose your favorite program, or if your school has chosen the program that they suggest you use that program, because odds are most of the teachers that your students are going to have are going to use the suggested program. And if you're the one teacher asking them to use a different program, well, you're asking them to have to learn the academics as well as the technology, and it's going to create more frustration for the student and the families. So, if you are really into Seesaw and your school district chose Google, this might be the year to take one for the team and just go with Google for now, knowing that you can go back to Seesaw when we get back to normal, whenever that is. The next thing I would suggest is record yourself giving directions for every assignment, so that way students can go back if they have any questions or confusion or they didn't hear it. They can go back to the video before having to come to you for help or to one of their peers. This will be helpful for you as well, save you some time. Then also offer office hours so that way students can come and get some clarification if they need more help, that they're not seeing in the instructions. Besides that, you can offer a rubric and an example of the assignment completed for the students to view. The rubric is really a great tool for students, even in the elementary grade level, to know what is expected of them. My professors have always given me the rubric for any assignments prior to it, and it helps me to know how much energy I need to spend on the assignment. It helps me to know what is important to the teacher, because a lot of times with writing or art or different classes like that, it can feel a little bit more subjective in the grading. So, providing the rubric will allow the student to know what exactly you're wanting from them. And then providing the example will also help them, because a lot of students may have never seen what you're asking them to create. And it's so much harder to make something if you don't know what it's supposed to look like. Just giving them the minimum, like, don't make it a great example, just make it like slightly below or close to average of what you expect your students to do. And then you'll have your students who exceed those expectations. And maybe you'll have more students who don't go below the expectations because they'll see what it's supposed to look like. On that same path of recording yourself with the instructions, another thing you can do is just post your recorded lessons so that way students can rewatch the whole thing. My math teacher for algebra in high school did that, and it was so helpful for me because algebra would just kind of go over my head at times when I was at home alone, even though it made sense when the teacher was explaining it. So, providing them with recorded versions of your lessons will really be helpful. I'm going to switch gears now from academics to their emotional and social health. I suggest taking emotion checks. They could be a survey or a Google Doc where students can type in their answers. But right now, it's really important to know where our students are emotionally. And so, just having a weekly check in like this will allow you to kind of keep an eye on students, because we know that right now students are not as safe as they might be as if they were in person, because we are normally there to monitor their physical health at least, and a lot of times their emotional health and mental health, and to know if maybe something might be going on in the home, and now we can't really see it. So if they can just do something simple by like coloring in a smiley face if they're feeling great this week, or jotting down descriptive words that describe their mood, You'll know which ones that you need to check in on, or to suggest your counselor checks in on. And then from there, focusing on creating the sense of community for your students, they're missing that right now. It can feel tricky to do that virtually, but there are ways. Like you could have some icebreakers at the beginning of the year, like asking students to choose an object or to draw a picture of something that represents their personality to share with the class. That way, everyone gets a chance to find out something personal about their peers before it's time to just learn, learn, learn. You could create some class traditions and routines that make them feel safe and at home. You could use collaborative projects. You could remember to make individual connections. So, besides just one on one calls, you could send out letters, you could have driveway visits, or drive by celebrations when they reach their big goals. These are all ways that you can make them feel seen. I know my university, George Fox University, one of their sayings is the promise that you will be known at that university. And they are really big on that. So I challenge you to know all of your students, not just what they're good at academically, but also personally. And then I would also suggest assigning large tasks in small doses, especially if you're doing something like project based learning, but for all assignments, really. My professors have multiple times for multiple online classes asked me to turn in drafts of my assignments at like the midway, the three-fourths of the way done, and then the completed project. You could break it down even into smaller chunks than that for your students so that way you can see who might be procrastinating, who might be really confused about what they're expected to do, and you can catch those students before they turn in a project that's completely wrong. You could give some feedback to those students on how to improve so that way they aren't stuck with a terrible grade that they have nothing they can do to fix. From there, you could make sure that you are creating expectations and teaching them explicitly not only your behavior norms, your community norms, but also your like schedule norms. This is something new that you're probably are not used to explicitly teaching, but students are going to need your help with organization. They're going to need your explicit teaching of how to schedule their days to make sure that they are getting their assignments done while also maintaining some fun free time. So maybe giving some examples of schedules, especially for your elementary sized students who are not used to having to be in charge of their day quite as much as they are. A technology thing that will be require some time commitment for you to learn how to do, but which will help your parents and your students so much is learning how to screencast. There are programs that allow you to do it. I'm sure Zoom and Google, but I've used Explain Everything, and a few other things to learn how to screencast, which is just the ability to record what is happening on your screen while simultaneously recording either a video of you talking, explaining, or just audio of you talking and explaining how to use the technology that they're expected to use, how to create a document, how to change the settings in a Word document. These are all things that they might not know how to do, and you could just quickly screencast and then upload for them, and then let your students know that it's there if they need it. But if they already know how to use the technology, then they don't have to spend time on it. It's a time commitment for you, but if you can do it, it's going to save so much frustration for your families. Besides that, you should probably look into making some take home kits. I know that not every district has funds for this, so looking into small businesses who might be offering grants, that's an option. Just make sure you inform your district. That you are asking for funds, even if it's from private people, because they need to know and give you permission to do that. So, inside those take home kits, you could have math manipulatives, books, dice, counters, just anything that they might need. It'll make planning easier for you because you'll know exactly what they have when you're planning lessons. And then my final advice is to make sure that you keep your office hours the same each week. It doesn't have to be the same each day. Obviously, you might want to have it different between the days so that way families can pop in when they actually have time. But keeping it the same each week will provide students with a sense of safety to realize that you're a responsible and reliable person that they can count on to be there for them. Have a morning meeting if possible, so that way your students get to talk to each other. And then make sure that you are sticking to those routines as hard as you can right now because they probably don't have as many routines in their life as they are used to. And as we all know, routines are key to making us feel safe. Some families may be capable of taking on homeschooling their students this year. Next episode, I will be discussing how to know if this is the right move for your family, how to do it legally, and how to plan effectively. If you enjoyed what we talked about, be sure to like and subscribe to wherever you listen to podcasts. Proceeds from this episode will be donated to Save the Children. You can learn more about how you can support us and what we talked about today by visiting us at highedpod.com.